Hi, this is Emerald and welcome to the Diamond Net, and today I'm going to be talking to you about another trap on the non-dual path, which is invalidating relative truths. So there's a tendency that I notice in myself as well as other seekers of sort of getting attached to ideas about what enlightenment entails. And, I think for people who have had experiences of ego transcendence in the past, like myself, this can be especially difficult to kind of navigate because you have these memories of like what it was like before, and then you come up with different ideas about what that means about the experience. And it can lead to basically taking on non-duality as a belief system. Now, of course, the problem here is that you're supposed to ideally be emptying your cup of beliefs and making yourself like open for that breakthrough, and really sort of abiding in realizing that you're ultimately going to be always in this big epistemic blind spot. So you're never really going to know anything for sure about the nature of reality. And it's this kind of acceptance of your own innocence and this acceptance of your beginner's mind to everything that really allows you to experience reality for what it is. And if from that state of openness, you can actually realize the true nature of self and reality. And so that's the whole idea behind it. But any belief, including beliefs in non-dual truths, can actually sort of shut down your awareness of those things. And one way that I've seen this manifest in myself from time to time and in other non-dual seekers is in the invalidation of relative truths within the realm of duality. So what I mean by this is like if we have experienced, let's say, ego transcendence in the past, like I have in the past, we might have a tendency to like formulate different beliefs around that. And so let's say if I had experienced this connectedness with everything before, where I felt like there was no difference between myself and anything else, and realizing that ultimately nothing is really separate and it's all part of one thing, so all is one. So in realizing that, but then not living that experience, it becomes a belief. And so if I just believe all is one, then I might be tempted to invalidate relative truths about separation. And so I might have a tendency to invalidate my need for boundaries or invalidate my ability to notice that, relatively speaking, I am separate from everything else and that I have to function in that way to get by in reality. Now, of course, a person doesn't need to have had a non-dual experience in the past to fall into these traps. A person could just be reading a lot of books about non-duality or have heard different concepts talked about, like heard somebody else say all is one and they took it on as a belief. And then, of course, they can start doing the same kind of invalidation of those relative truths. So, for example, like if we've heard the phrase that, oh, it's all the illusion of Maya, all of this is an illusion, and we take that at face value as a belief, and it's not like an experienced reality, we may come to invalidate so many things about reality. So, for example, if there's something like really harmful going on and somebody's really hurt by that, we might have a tendency to overlook the pain and say, oh, well, that's the illusion of Maya anyway, all suffering is an illusion, so get over it. But that makes us very uncompassionate and very invalidating of an aspect of this reality that's going on. And this tendency to take on non-duality as a belief also leads to a lot of gullibility and ungroundedness in reality, where a person might just be willing to believe things that sound good about the non-dual path, but maybe not like apply it to everything. So, for example, like if you've heard the phrase like all is love, well, that is something that I experienced like in that state, if you were to call it a state, and I just realized that basically love was the unifying factor of all things in reality. But at the same time, like if I use that to sort of bypass over, maybe some uncomfortable truths, like, so for example, let's say that I'm really, really angry at somebody, and I don't necessarily want to acknowledge that because I think that that makes me a bad person. Well, I might just kind of like defer to that non-dual truth. It's like, oh, well, all is love and all is one, and so therefore my anger is invalid, and I don't feel that way because I feel that connectedness, and I realize that it's just me in another form, you know. But the thing is, that doesn't necessarily mean you're over that emotion. Or with regard to gullibility, like let's say that there was like, you know, something like negative going on, like somebody were trying to like mess you over, or like, I don't know, let's say that you were in business with someone and they were doing some kind of shady business deal where they were trying to take advantage of you. Well, it's like maybe you have a bit of a fear of confrontation and you notice it going on, but you don't want to call them out. But you don't necessarily want to admit that you have a fear of confrontation, and so you just grab for a non-dual truth. It's like, oh, well, all is love and all is one, and therefore that means all is positive, and that I don't have to watch out for this. And you know, so this can of course lead to many like foolish decisions in life. But this isn't just a trap in the practical sense, like a trap that's going to like get you into problems in practical life. Of course, that's very important, but it's also a trap that's going to cause you to be less aware of everything. And it's also going to cause you to invalidate certain aspects of reality as invalid. Because remember, relative truths are also an aspect of reality, even if it's not the ultimate truth. You know, so I think people have a tendency to think, oh, well, you know, these higher up spiritual truths, like all is one and, you know, like everything is love, you know, well, don't those just invalidate those lower truths, like everything is separate and, you know, like everybody basically has to be able to make it in society? And the answer to that is no. I mean, you still have the practical concerns of life. And so when we invalidate that practical sphere, what we don't realize is that we're actually separating ourselves out from what reality actually is. Because reality is an infinite thing, you know, and it has many different facets, many different perspectives that are valid from within that reality. So if we're looking and we're saying, oh, well, all those relative truths, those are lesser truths than the absolute truth, it's like, well, from one perspective that's true, you know, ultimately there is like one thing going on here that is true, but also part of that one thing is those very many different perspectives going on. So now I talked about this actually in my last video, that, you know, I suspect that, you know, unconditional love, the ability to do that and the ability to accept everything maybe comes before the ego can be transcended as opposed to after. And I'm not sure if this is true. Again, take this with a grain of salt. I just know that whenever I transcended the ego, I had the capacity for unconditional love, and for a long time I'd always assumed that had come along with the ego transcendence. But now I kind of think, well, maybe it was my ability to love unconditionally in those moments that allowed me to transcend the ego in the first place, because I could essentially see the whole world as whole, you know, and I didn't have any resistance to anything. And so if we come into resistance to relative truths, you can see how this could stand directly in the way of actually being able to transcend the ego, because you're invalidating an entire facet of reality, or in many different facets of reality. It also lends itself to unconsciousness. So if we take, let's say, the parable of the blind men and the elephant. So basically you have, you know, a group of blind men, and they come in and they're trying to feel an elephant to see what the elephant is like. But the elephant is so big and such a complex creature that each of the blind men like touch a different part of the elephant. So one of the blind men, they touch the tusks of the elephant, and the other one touches the feet of the elephant, and the other one touches the ear of the elephant, and the other one touches like the side of the elephant. And they each come back, of course, reporting different things about how the elephant is. And one of them says, oh, the elephant, it's big and floppy and flat. And one says, oh, it's smooth and it's long and it's pointed at the end. You know, and another person says, oh, it's rough and it's flat And so they're basically giving all of these like relative descriptions of the elephant, and all of the blind men are like in disagreement with each other. Like they're like, no, it's this way, no, it's that way. And it's just that they are in a blind spot because they're blind. They can't see the full nature of the elephant, just like we can't really see with our minds, in a sense, the full nature of reality. We can't really understand it. It's like it's too much for us to get. And so what we have to do is we have to look at reality in the same way that those blind men look at the elephant. So the elephant, in a sense, represents reality as it is. And so we can experience different facets of it, and they are relatively true from what we're experiencing, because it's true that we are experiencing those things. So it may not be true that the elephant is big and floppy. That's just what the blind man said that was feeling the elephant's ear. But it is true that he was experiencing that. And I think that that's the distinction that has to be made, is that there are relative truths, and those are experienceable truths as well. But then there's also the ultimate truth that all is one and all is love and emptiness and all of those non-dual things all rolled into one. But let's say that there was a blind man that came at the elephant with this idea of non-duality, but not like from a real realization standpoint, just as like a belief. And so that blind man wouldn't even necessarily notice that the elephant is rough, or that the elephant is long and pointy like the tusk. Wouldn't notice anything about the elephant, would feel the elephant and say, oh, well, the elephant is the illusion of Maya, and the elephant is me anyway, and and just get into the weeds with all of those non-dual truths that may be true from the ultimate perspective. But if you're not directly experiencing that, then that's in a sense going to make you very unconscious to what's actually going on in your reality. Now, ultimately, the tendency to always defer to top shelf spiritual truths is also a form of spiritual bypassing. And it's usually done actually to uphold the ego structure, a more spiritual ego. Because we want to see ourselves maybe in a particular way, and we want to think that, oh, well, I'm already there, I'm detached, and, I see the nature of reality, and I see the way things are in this way. And any like emotions that might come up that might contradict that. So for example, if we think that, oh, the spiritual way is, oh, I don't want to be angry, then we might, like actually suppress our anger and repress it away, thus making us less and less conscious of our own emotional reality. Because we want to say, oh, well, I realize that all is love and all is one, and so I shouldn't be angry at anybody at all, and so we invalidate those emotional aspects of ourselves, usually most of all when we do this. And so there's a tendency to believe very subtly that we are our thoughts, and that we are our internal experiences in general, like our emotions. And we want to see reality as this separate thing. So we think of, oh, that internal reality, that's something separate that is me, and then out here is reality that's separate from me. And so that's like the very nature of duality, is to believe that you are a separate self. And, ultimately that's not true. And so ironically enough, those non-dual beliefs are actually used to solidify the difference between the emotions and the thoughts and the external experience. Because if we have, let's say, some thoughts arise that maybe contradict our ego, or particularly our spiritual ego in this sense, then we might have a tendency to not want to notice that. So if we have, let's say, some cynical thoughts come up, and it doesn't jibe with our non-dual truths that we're believing in just as a belief, and then we might have a tendency to be like, oh, I never thought that, and genuinely believe that that never happened. Or again, if emotions come up that you think you should be past because you're, have more spiritual progress than others, and progress really does deserve scare quotes, because ultimately it is a pathless path. There's not really progress toward enlightenment per se. And so let's say if we feel like we should be beyond emotions, because that's our idea, like, oh, if I have detachment, then that means that I don't get any kind of strong emotions at all. It's all just peace all the time. And well, that becomes a problem if we do feel excitement or joy or sadness or anger, or really anything that goes out of the bounds of just peace. So ultimately, what we're dealing with here as a result of the human mind's inability to really fathom of truth. And, like when you try to take on a non-dual belief, there's a tendency for people to want to go one way or the other and to think, well, if this truth and this truth are contradictory, then one of them must be true and one of them must be false. And that's a tendency of people to think that way because practically most things generally kind of work that way in our reality. But the reality of the matter is that reality, it doesn't necessarily work that way on the existential level. And there are tons of paradoxes of the human mind where when the human mind attempts to understand them or believe them, we don't really understand how those things can go together because one perspective that's true and another perspective that's also true seemingly have a very adversarial relationship. So for example, if we take the absolute truth that, all is one, let's say, and we take the relative truth that, I'm a separate individual with needs and everything, these two things seem to contradict one another. And so we say, well, one has to be true and one has to be false. And, most people who aren't on the path would say, oh yeah, well, of course I'm separate. That's a very obvious reality. It's evident to me. But somebody who is maybe on the path, who doesn't realize that they're creating these beliefs, will say, oh, well, all is one, and therefore that separate aspect is invalid. But ultimately, it comes from realizing that, you have to be able to accept those paradoxes. So one paradox is that in the realm of the infinite, so since reality is infinite, within the realm of the infinite, there's also the finite, and there's also the nothing. So there's things that seem to contradict, but because reality doesn't quite work to the same beat as the human mind does, we can't really fathom of those concepts. So again, it comes from realizing that the finite is an aspect of the infinite and that the separate is an aspect of the one. And, generally things like that just don't really seem to go together can be simultaneously true. And so if we're going to be wise and to make wise decisions in life, we really have to be able to understand that each paradigm in and of itself is mutually exclusive. So if we're, talking about non-duality, we can say all is one. And, if we're living from that state, of course, that's true for us. But at the same time, it doesn't invalidate any relative truths that, seem to contradict just because they seem to contradict. Anyway, that's all I have for you for now. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, go ahead, click the like button below and subscribe. Also, leave me a comment down below. I love hearing from you guys. And I also want to say thank you so much to my patrons. You guys are awesome. And if you would like to become my patron in exchange for rewards, I have a link down below in the description box. Also, if you would like to sign up for notifications, you can go to thediamondnet.org and you just enter your name and your email, and I'll send out an email once a week every Sunday just to let you know, hey, I released a video. Or you can also click the bell icon next to the subscribe button, and that'll tell you every time that I personally release a video because they don't let all my subscribers know when I've released one. So if you click that, they'll let you know directly in your notifications. Anyway, that's all I have for now, and until next time, keep becoming more you.